Hello, I'm Jonathan Cooley, uh, Arthur Cooley's son, here to add to the diversity of voices contributing to this online tribute. Art Cooley. Uh, how to start a conversation about Art Cooley. If he were here, he might have some ideas. I know, not fair. Making snarky comments about someone who is not here to defend themselves. But I think everyone who knew him um, would agree. The term big comes to mind. Not a very descriptive word unless you start adding nouns. Big personality, big laugh. You remember that one? For those he loved, he had big love. Or if you happen to be an entity polluting the environment or harming wildlife habitat, he had a big opinion for you. And then maybe EDF had a big lawsuit for you. I look at all the names of the people contributing to this honoring project, and I see people he influenced. He was an influencer before the term had market meaning. I see passionate scientists, successful writers, community builders. It would be foolish of me to try to express better what many of you have so eloquently said and written about art. But when faced with stiff competition, one strategy is to cheat. And I have insider information. Art was my dad. So I will try to use that unique relationship to shed some perhaps different color light on who Art Cooley was. While Art had all the big characteristics I mentioned earlier, he was also big complicated. My relationship with him was complicated, as is any familial relationship. But don't worry, I'm not here to air dirty laundry, but I will come back to the notion of big. Not only did he have these big behavioral characteristics, he was physically big, certainly from the viewpoint of a 6-year-old. More on that in a minute. But analogies, some cliched, might come to mind when a son describes a father as big, like a big, mature tree and a seedling. And while there was plenty of shade under his tree, if it was a deciduous tree, getting the botany right honors him. There were nutrients from leaf fall. I was very nourished growing up under his canopy. A great wealth of knowledge and experiences were mine to gobble up and digest. And I feasted. But I think this analogy only goes so far. So I'd like to explore another large force in the natural world to help give insight into art and my relationship with him. Growing up in and around the ocean, I quickly learned what an awesome force an ocean wave is. I've come to love waves and sliding down them in many forms on and in all manner of craft, in rivers, on paddle boards and kayaks, and of course, the ocean waves, on anything I could get my hands on, including surfboards, kayaks, inflatable mats, water skis, and perhaps most memorable to me, my father's back. He loved to body surf, and as a child, I would watch him swim out through huge waves and ride them back in on his belly. I was tiny, but wanted to go. He said, "Sure, but hold on tight." I clamped my arms around his neck. His powerful strokes pulled us out under the crashing foam. I held on tight. I had no choice and waited for him to surface before I could take a breath. After a dozen or so of these hold tight and hold breath moments of fear, we would be out past the breakers. "You ready for the fun part?" he'd say. His kicking and paddling would almost shake me loose, but then we would be on it. Salty foam crashing all around, just able to take small breaths. He would throw his arms to his side and we would accelerate out in front of the break. Speeding over clear water, he'd flip his head to clear the hair from his face. Glassy water hissing around his shoulders. I could look up and see the beach. I quivered with excitement. Let's do it again and again. I could soon ride him on my knees and then my feet. Sometimes I fell off. Scary. Stay on, and the thrill is indescribable. How often would that describe our collective relationships with Art Cooley? He would catch a wave, and if you stayed with him, what an experience. The wave could be the love of learning, passion for protecting the environment, even the history of timepieces or the rabbit hole of wine tasting. But he didn't hog the wave, not always anyway. Wave riders out there know how hard that is to resist. He would always encourage those riding with him to catch their own waves. And when you did, he would applaud, loud and big. So from all of us who have been nourished by your canopy, caught your waves with you, and gone on to find our own, thank you, Art Cooley, Dad.
Thank you for the opportunity to let me say a few words about Art. I really appreciate it. My first meeting with Art Cooley and his family came 70 years ago this month. We were newcomers to Quogue. Art's family were well established in the village, having moved from upstate New York during the Great Depression. I learned a great deal from the Cooley family over many decades. From Art's father, Harvey Cooley, I learned the importance of learning to get along with and like people. He was a people person, heart and soul. He would say to me over and over, George, there's some good in almost everybody. Sometimes you have to dig deep to find it. Your job, find it. From Art's mom, Helen Cooley, I learned another valuable lesson way back in the mid to late 1950s when I worked for their business, the Surf Club of Quogue. She ran the business, a woman running a business, unheard of in those days, but that's what she did, and she did a wonderful job at it. From Art, I learned more than anything else. As a 10-year-old child, my first summer at the Surf Club, I'd walk down the beach following him with my friends, and he would stop by and pick up all the shells on the beach and describe in great detail the living creatures that lived within those shells. He also, at that point, come to think of it, he'd see something like an empty beer bottle or some kind of thing in the ocean that shouldn't have been there, put in by humans, and basically he would point out to us that's not good. So long before anything happened with his official creation of the environmental defense with friends, he basically focused on that. Later on, when I was a teenager, from mid-teenage years into my early 20s, I lifeguarded at the Surf Club bench with Art. 6 years, 6 days a week, all summer long. On those days off, we'd go to the Quogue Wildlife Refuge and I'd learn about the flora and fauna. But while sitting on a lifeguard bench, it was strictly learning about everything in the sea, from plankton to whales and whatever is in between. Amazing experience, very important experience to me, learning about all that. As fascinating as that was to me, far more importantly, I learned things from Art at that point in time that he recognized at that point in time the danger to our environment being caused by humanity in the name of progress. Basically, pollutants in our groundwater, in our waters, in our air. It also recognized on the East End the beginning of overdevelopment into the wetland areas. And those are things that many people recognize that. Some were horrified by it, but very few acted upon it. Art was one of those few people who stepped up to the plate and did something about it. That, of course, was initially focusing on ridding DDT, which got rid of in the entire country eventually. And then basically at that point in time, he went on to many other projects with the founding of the Environmental Defense Fund. His love of his life till the time he passed away this year. In closing, take a brief walk with me along the beautiful Quogue Wetlands Preserve from Dune Road to Shinnecock Bay. A walk which inspired Art from his childhood forward to spend his life focused on preserving nature's beauty. A walk used by Art to inspire hundreds of his students over the past several decades, our current and future environmentalists. A walk which led previous Quogue mayors Decker Orr and Thelma Georgeson to preserve this land in perpetuity. A walk I take daily, a walk which inspired me to recently formally request our village board to add Art's name to this little corner of paradise. Quag, born and bred Art Cooley, deserves this honor, and I trust that they will see the wisdom of so doing. Rest in peace, my friend. You have made Mother Earth a better place for all of us.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this tribute. I knew Art Cooley both as a fellow teacher for 14 years, I was in the math department, and then as principal of the high school for 12 years. In 1959, Art returned to Bellport High School following completion of his military duty, having earlier been with the school for a year. The district was newly centralized and overseen by a school board dominated by Brookhaven National Lab scientists, who were highly supportive of the school's programs. The high school, in particular, was organized in such a way to provide a sense of belonging for all the teachers, and the experiences for most were very rewarding. There was strong emphasis on Regents' examination results, but also considerable freedom. The principal, Tom Feeney, would often comment, "Get a good teacher and get out of his way." And yes, mostly men teachers in those days. Times have changed. This was the perfect environment for someone like Art, and as the years went on, he created new courses such as marine biology, ornithology, and gardening and wild foods. He established Students for Environmental Quality, known as SEQ, managed to get our local assemblyman to promote what became known as the Bottle Bill, and join others in forming the Environmental Defense Fund. In the process, he was fortunate to work with citizens such as Dennis Pulston, an amazing, multi-talented artist and naturalist living in Brookhaven Hamlet. On my first day as principal, I found a note from Art in my mailbox. It read, "Dave, don't let the Neanderthals get you down." That proved to be excellent advice. When making required visits to classrooms, my general policy was to arrive unannounced, since this avoided a show for my benefit. But in Art's case, I always asked that he just invite me to hear something he felt would be of special interest. I always enjoyed his class on gardening and wild foods. After one visit to a wild foods presentation, where Art tried to get this meat and potato guy to taste some strange food, I decided to stick to the gardening presentations. We visited Art and Nancy in their home in East Patchogue, and as we left, their little boy gifted us something to plant in our garden on Chapel Avenue in Brookhaven. We did so and have never been able to fully eliminate it. It is mint. Art teamed up with the English department to get the Board of Education to implement a policy directing all teachers to provide for writing in their classes. Well intended, but not universally welcomed by the faculty. Once I remarked that Art was fortunate to have chosen science, since just about everyone enjoyed the contents of such classes: animals, dissections, reproduction, etc. His reply, "Well, Dave, you have the quadratic formula." We had a hearty laugh together about that. In 1985, Art was nominated for a statewide Science Teacher of the Year award. He did not win. The winner must have walked on water, but I was dazzled and informed by the letters of support that were written by many of his former students, extolling the significance of his teaching and friendship during and after their high school years. I'm sure I wasn't the only one surprised Art chose early retirement. The last time I saw him was at the funeral for the wife of a teaching colleague. When I said, "I thought you would to be carried out of the classroom," he responded, "No one asked me to stay." This was another case of a teacher being told he would have to retire in the first year of availability or forfeit an attractive retirement incentive reward. Our loss. But Art went on to another fulfilling career as an eco-travel naturalist. Another form of teaching, different classroom, their gain. After Art moved to California, I would hear from him on occasion, often sharing an op-ed he had submitted to a local paper or a letter to the mayor of his city. He never stopped caring about the world around him. He certainly made all of us care more.
Hi, Shelley Steifeld here. When I first came to Bellport High School in 1970, I was the Dean of Student Activities at that time, and Art sought me out because SEQ had begun to pursue its causes. And I learned very quickly that you didn't say no to Art Cooley, but it was much more fun and to work with him on the goals that he set, even if this meant autopsying a dead whale in the courtyard at the high school, or rafting the Lehigh with a group of students, or paying for a bus for a group of students to go to Albany to lobby for the deposit bill, or entering the Newsday High School of the Year contest, in which Bellport High School came in third, arranging class trips on the Carmens River, or supporting SEQ in their fight for saving the environment. Art even talked me into overlooking Jonathan's climbing on the roof of the high school at one point. His approach to every issue was very enthusiastic, sincere, and always swept you up into the cause. And it's that enthusiasm and excitement for serious causes that is perhaps Art's legacy. We will miss him.
I'd like to say a few words about my good friend, Art Cooley. The one thing that never really gets mentioned, except by those who worked with Art, is the mentor that he was to so many of the younger teachers. If you worked there and you were a new teacher, Art was a great resource. I started out with a college degree with only 2 education courses, and I had never been in front of a classroom to teach. To say I was underprepared would be a gross understatement. I was hired with 16 new teachers just in the high school. The other rookie teachers that I worked with complained about how guarded their colleagues, their veteran colleagues, were with their files, and how reluctant they were to share their class plans as if they were gold. I was fortunate to be placed under the watchful care of Bellport Science's Fab Four: Dick Baldwin, Joe Roberge, Marv Lowen, and Art Cooley. They opened up their files, plans, and knowledge to ensure that I survived. As a new guy, I moved from room to room. When teaching biology, I was always in Art's room. In one of those classes, my class plan was completely derailed because of a discussion that went off into a related topic. I managed to cover almost nothing that I had planned. I asked Art what went wrong. He smiled and said he thought I did a great job. He skillfully explained to me that I had gotten the kids involved, and the true task of an educator is to harness that interest and use it to complete the lesson. It doesn't have to be in that day. Get them to go out, get them to research, get them to look into it, and get them to actually do the work for you. He gleefully suggested that I scrap that little black plan book with the 5 boxes across the top and the 5 boxes across the side and the 7 boxes across the top. He brought out a blue cloth-covered 3-ring binder and a hole punch. And he told me, he said, keep your plans in here. Write big, leave a lot of space, and be prepared to make adjustments. I did it. And it worked for 35 years, and I still, believe it or not, have many of those blue binders with my class plans in them. At the end of my first year, Art asked me about my future plans. I told him that teaching for the whopping salary of $6,200 per year and looking forward to retiring at $32,500 a year if I managed to get a master's degree and 60 credits was not actually what I had thought of as my career. I told him I probably would teach for a couple of years and then get a better paying job. He laughed as only Art could and said, I've watched you teach. You're a lifer. You're never going to give up this profession because I can tell you love it. And he was right. He was a lifelong learner. Late in his career, he sat in Connie Ludlam's language class as a student trying to learn a second language. He encouraged students not to accept being average. My wife was in one of his biology classes early in his career. After getting a C in the first marking period, Art talked to her and told her he knew she could do better, and she did. Later in my career, Art kept pushing me to mentor a student teacher. I told him that my style would really not work for others. He disagreed and convinced me to give it a try. Again, he was right. I ended up working with student teachers for over 10 years. He had a way of seeing things that others didn't. He had a way of making you see things the way that they really were, and a way of making you see that they could be changed and how to change them. His legacy is never ending, and it lives on in all of us who knew him, who he taught, who he mentored, and who he loved. He is missed by all. Rest in peace, my friend.
Hi, my name is Tom Dutton. In the fall of 1975, a young, inexperienced science teacher began his 36-year career at Bellport High School. This novice was greeted and mentored by a middle-aged Art Cooley. The first thing I noticed was that Art's room was never empty. It was always occupied with students writing political action letters, working on projects, and discussing current events. Higher learning was taking place in room 202. Art's mentoring process was inviting and subtle and based on three premises. First, be true to yourself. Develop your own style of teaching. Examine your strengths and weaknesses and be willing to listen to others. We are never too old to learn and adapt. Second, love what you're doing. Your excitement about the subject stimulates creative lessons and brings value to the subject matter. Demonstrate that learning doesn't only occur in the classroom. Lastly, recognize the backgrounds and talents that come with your students. Learning doesn't happen in a sterile environment, but must be incorporated into the students' previous experiences. Each student has a preferred method of expressing themselves, whether it be art, music, writing, or physical projects. Thank you, Mr. Cooley, for taking me under your wing. It was my pleasure to continue the ornithology class after you're retired. Your patience, discussion, and most of all, friendship were greatly appreciated.
It was September of 1965 that I arrived to teach at Stony Brook, and one of the first people I met was a fellow faculty member, Bob Smolker. He introduced me to a group on the South Shore of Long Island that met monthly to discuss and take action on various environmental problems. The group called itself the Brookhaven Town Natural Resources Committee, BTNRC, with various professionals from Brookhaven Labs, SUNY Stony Brook, local environmental officials, and classroom educators. One of those was Art Cooley, who ran the meeting. Dennis Puliston, there as well as Myra Gelban, one of Art's students. There were no formal organizational structures, and nobody was elected to anything. But meetings were informative and fun, with coffee and donuts at the end. And most players left with some sort of assignment designed to protect the environment. Art was a born leader, very smart, with a good sense of humor and raucous laugh. And for me, it was the beginning of a friendship that lasted for 57 years. In early 1966, I left a meeting with the assignment to write a letter to the editor of the local newspaper. I had worked on the DDT problem at Dartmouth, so I wrote that the Suffolk County Mosquito Commission was spraying DDT on local marshes, quote, by a person who thought it was harmless. Soon, I got a call from a lawyer in Patchogue named Victor Yannicone, who suggested if we wanted action on DDT, that a lawsuit might succeed. So we gathered our reprints, ran the Xerox machines, he filed the suit, and in a couple of weeks, we had a temporary injunction prohibiting the Mosquito Commission from any more DDT spraying. That was the end of DDT spraying on Long Island. The result took just weeks, where others on Long Island had been trying to do it for years. The temporary injunction stayed in place for a year, but then the court dismissed the case, claiming lack of jurisdiction. But by that time, we had sued the state of Michigan, got dismissed again, but got injunctions against 52 Michigan cities to stop their use of DDT on elm trees. We were winning bans even as we were losing legally, and in doing so, learned that science and law made a good combination. Thus was born a new organization, the Environmental Defense Fund, or EDF, to protect the environment by marrying science and law. Once again, Art stepped up as a leader, no small feat, with no membership and no funding. Now, 55 years later, EDF has become an international force with a presence in 28 countries and about 3 million members. Art remained on the board of trustees for this entire time, contributing leadership and inspiration throughout. In the early years, Art and Dennis Puliston organized birding trips, mostly on Long Island, for their friends and many of Art's students. All of us were and are lifelong birders. A bit later, both Dennis and Art became naturalists on ecological cruise ships, where passengers benefited from their immense knowledge of natural history. I thought this was such an excellent idea that I followed in their footsteps as I entered retirement. Over the last decades, with so much overseas travel and Art moving to California, we saw each other only at EDF board meetings 3 times a year, but always quickly rekindled our long and close friendship, anchored in the memories of those early activist days. What a great leader and a great friend he was. Art will not be forgotten.
My name is Jim Tripp. I'm a lawyer. I worked at the Environmental Defense Fund from the spring of 1973 until early 2019. The first 4 years I worked out of the national headquarters in a farmhouse in East Setauket, Long Island. Art Cooley, as one of the founders, was a frequent visitor there, along with Bob Smoker and Charlie Wister. I had many conversations with Art. He was the effective leader of the organization, just because of his charismatic character, his vision, his energy, his drive, and he was a very effective communicator. And I sort of personally doubt that EDF would have survived without Art. Then after 4 years, the office moved into New York. In the early 1980s, we bought a house in Bellport on the South Shore of Long Island, very close to East Patchogue, where Art was working. And Art and I, starting in the mid-1980s, began working on a series of projects in the town of Brookhaven in Suffolk County, really as local activists. One of the first was commenting on the then evolving town of Brookhaven master plan, where we advocated for 5-acre zoning in the Pine Barrens. We worked together in opposing the Corps of Engineers' idea to build an artificial dune on the ocean front of Fire Island with David Stravinsky and then Mayor Frank Trotta. We helped to put together in Bellport a residential backyard food waste composting project in which about 30% of the households participated. And then with virtually everyone in Bellport and Brookhaven Hamlet, we actively opposed the proposal to sell a 19-acre parcel known as the Elias parcel on the east side of the river to Home Depot. As Dennis Puliston said, that would have been an ecological disaster. But out of that experience with Tom Williams, Art and I decided to put together the Carmen's River Partnership as a way of getting the town and the county and local activists to look systematically at unprotected critical groundwater watershed lands along the Carmen's River. And then finally, after Dennis Puliston died in June of 2001, Art and I decided that we would try and raise money, enough money so that EDF could hire a Puliston scientist. And fortunately, after about a year and a half, Fred Krupp decided that we raised enough funds so that that could happen. So I work with Art both in his capacity as a board member, but also as really a local activist. And he was just an incredible person with whom to work. And I was really saddened when he decided to move out to California in 2003. I missed him greatly, and I still miss him today, and I will for the rest of my life.
I'm Fred Krupp. Until this year, Environmental Defense Fund had never existed without Art Cooley. As Art told EDF's assembled staff a few years back at our annual retreat, he was present at the creation. I was in the room where it happened, he said, referring to his own living room on Long Island, where a few scientists and an attorney agreed to bring the case against DDT that led both to EDF's founding and the United States banning DDT. Art served for more than half a century on EDF's Board of Trustees, including as its chairman. EDF's first secretary, the late Marion Rogers, shared her memories of the early years in her affectionate and often funny book, Acorn Days. I think you'll enjoy this. Art Cooley usually presided at the executive committee meetings, and his conciliatory talents were often put to the test as the debate waxed hot. Although Art obviously subscribed to Lyndon B. Johnson's favorite biblical quotation, "Come, let us reason together," I always felt that, like LBJ's, his physical vitality helped subdue many a dissonant whose point of view had been thoroughly aired. You suspected that Art could easily pick up any offender and toss him out of the meeting bodily, and this generally held perception helped keep the meetings moving briskly along. Now, I agree Art's physical presence was powerful, though I experienced him differently. Art was rare in that he radiated a natural charisma and warmth that helped bring people together in common cause. He was generous in spirit and insightful in his observations. When he spoke at EDF's 50th anniversary, Art said, "It has been one of my life's greatest satisfaction to watch EDF grow and solve even bigger and more challenging problems." Art's joy was simply contagious. For so many of us, knowing Art will go down as one of our great satisfactions of our lives.
Hi, my name is Diane Shad Stout, and I'm from the graduating class of 1967 from Bellport High School. I moved to Bellport to start my junior year of high school there, and soon made some friends, and got involved with every Saturday morning bird watching with Mr. Cooley, Sally Pulston, and the whole group of us. Getting up at 5 o'clock on Saturday morning, my mom thought I was losing my mind because most 16-year-old girls aren't doing that. But started doing that, went to New Hampshire, to Mount Monadnock, to Keene, Memorial Day weekends with Mr. Cooley and Mr. Pulston and the group. And during that time, it started for me, I believe, because of Mr. Cooley, my love of birds, being outside, nature, etc. So over 50 years later, I still have that love. I've been able to give that love to my children and then to my grandchildren. I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful that I got to come to Mr. Cooley's get-together a few years ago and see him and enjoy listening and being with him again and letting him know in person how much he meant to me and my love of birding and nature and the outdoors and animal life, etc., etc. I took part in advanced biology with Mr. Cooley. He was one of the greatest teachers. We could talk to him about anything. I also took part in going over to Sally's to watch the movie All My Babies, which we couldn't do at the school, and we had to have our parents' permission to do that. Going to Stony Brook to see lectures. It was just a great time of my life, and here, over 50 years later, it's still a very important part of my life every day, making sure my birds are fed, the hummingbirds, my grandchildren's birds, my children's. Everybody has that love of outdoors and birds. And Mr. Cooley, I feel, gave that to me. And I'm very thankful for him.
Hi, I'm Myra Gelband. Art Cooley was my high school biology teacher, and his enthusiasm, encouragement, and support propelled me, like many others, to further study the natural sciences. In college, I double majored in biology and English literature and found my career in journalism. When I was a junior in high school, Mr. Cooley asked me to be part of the Brookhaven Town Natural Resources Committee, BTNRC, which became an activist group in the early days of the environmental movement, a precursor to EDF. I was the only student. Art chaired the meetings, and I was made the secretary because I was eager and also because it was convenient for him. During study halls, he would give me the letters and editorials that he wrote with instructions to fix it up, whatever it needs. I would carefully go through each draft, making whatever changes I thought would improve it, and then carefully explain to Art my thinking. Usually he agreed, not always, but always giving me his trust and confidence. At the time, I had no idea how valuable that experience would be as I moved through my career. Really, that was my introduction to editing. What a gift. Thanks, Art. From school days to a lasting friendship all through the years. My last visit with Art was in early 2020, just ahead of the pandemic. My husband Dave and I spent an afternoon with him in La Jolla while we were on a California road trip. Art took us to one of his favorite birding locales, including a recently built osprey nesting platform. He was carrying his long-range birding scope and had his binoculars around his neck. He was ready for whatever might appear, for something in nature to surprise and delight him. He really loved everything about the natural world. What a gift. Thank you, Art.
I'm Gail Tooker. I grew up in Brookhaven and attended Bellport High School. My earliest memories of Art Cooley go back to 1959, when he and Dennis Puliston took a group of high schoolers to Florida over Easter vacation. Even though I was only 10 years old, as I was friends with Sally Puliston, I was invited to go along. I felt like I was on another planet in Florida. It was amazing. That experience infected me with the travel bug, and I have harbored that bug for my entire life. It's true that the various courses I took in high school with Art inspired my pursuit of college degrees in biology, marine sciences, and environmental education, which then led to a successful college teaching career in these areas. I still think the most important thing that Art Cooley did for me was way back in 1969, when he suggested that I go speak to the director of the Quogue Wildlife Refuge about their hiring me to create a nature program for children at the refuge. In 1970, this came to pass, and I spent 10 wonderful years running the field ecology program there. This program is still running today, more than 50 years later. I consider my stint at Quogue to be the best thing I'd ever done in my life. When I sat down to write this tribute, it astounded me just how much of my life had been inspired in some way by Art Cooley. I now wish I had taken the time while he was still with us to tell him so.
These are two environmental evenings that we had. Also had an interesting sidelight. A few years before that, Roger Payne had recorded the songs of humpback whales. And if you've heard it, you know it is a very haunting, mystical sort of sound. It's just a wonderful sound. And somebody came up with the idea that we ought to start the environmental evening with those sounds. This would be simple. We'd take a phonograph down there to the stage, bring everybody in the auditorium, turn the sounds on, then we could go on to hear Paul Craig and some other things. But instead, I had a student by the name of Teddy Travis, who's now a minister and lives in Denver, Colorado, who was much more interested in music than he was in biology. And so I said to Teddy at one point, I said, do you think you could, with musical instruments, make these sounds? He said, oh, sure. Well, I can't even carry 3 blind mice. And so he set out to do this, and he was successful. And so on the evening that we opened, everybody came into the auditorium. We turned the lights down, so it was black. We started the record of Roger Payne's songs of the Humpback Whale that went on for 3, 4, or 5 minutes, as I recall. And then things started to change. There were some other sounds that were very similar coming in. There was some light behind the screen on the stage. Roger Payne's music was clearly going downhill or becoming quieter. And then the curtain opens, and there's about 7 or 8 musicians on stage playing Humpback Whale sound.
Wow.
And that was the only sound that you heard. The record had been turned off. Teddy Travis had written the music for those instruments, and they were reading that music. And some of them were playing music in a very bizarre way. I mean, there was a cello, as I recall, or maybe a violin, and they were playing it from the back side of the strings. You know, it was somehow they got a different. Don't ask me about music. I don't know. Anyway, so Teddy Travis really made a big hit when we started out that way.
I'm Helen Gelband. When my sister Myra left for college, I was a sophomore, and Art recruited me to take over as BTNRC secretary. I wasn't in his 10th grade biology class, but later I took his classes in marine biology and advanced biology. From Mr. Cooley, Art, I absorbed lessons that I still live by today. First, there's a lot to be discovered in the world if you just look, even nearby like in the Carmen's River. And second, that people, even ordinary ones, can change the world, especially working together. Although I left an early career in botany for public health, I've remained an environmentalist at heart and have continued to love and explore nature. Myra and I have followed puffins on both sides of the Atlantic. Even our older sister Barbara, who ended up a lawyer, spent her marine biology summer watching horseshoe crabs develop from microscopic eggs in our dining room, an interest she maintained for life. Another gift from Art are enduring friendships, cemented by working together. The first Earth Day was in 1970, and our class organized an environmental evening. Alice Quattrochi, my lifelong friend, was the general chairperson, and I recruited the speakers. The evening included a fair where, quote, from garbage, Jonathan Cooley took plastic and broken glass and created window hangings. My class also produced the first study of the Carmen's River Basin, which was taken forward by students later on and emerged finally as the beautiful Carmen's River Story by Elizabeth Shreve and Pam Borg. Growing up in Bellport, everything just seemed normal. It was our world. It's only with time and distance that I see how incredibly special it all was, and how much art influenced the way I see the world and the things I've thought I could achieve. Thank you, Art Cooley.
Hello, I'm Alice Quattrochi, a former student and friend of Art Cooley. Like so many, I was deeply influenced by the extraordinary courses and adventurous field trips with Art and Dennis Puleston, but I'd like to focus on one pivotal opportunity. Art nominated me to chair the first environmental evening at Bellport High School in 1970. We introduced the public to a week-long series of seminars with subject experts who reported on our fragile ecosystems and concluded the week with the first newspaper recycling drive. The fact that students programmed that effort was the direct result of Art's teaching philosophy and the empowering practices that developed high school students into teachers. We gradually realized what it really meant to effectively communicate to organize and reach out to our families, neighbors, and lawmakers. It meant taking responsibility to learn so that we might guide, to cultivate generosity so we could encourage others, to build bridges across disciplines, and even maintain a sense of humor while navigating a conflicting storm of new information, old beliefs, and politics. And still we had fun, built lifelong friendships and a larger like-minded community. Thank you, Art. You are the model for all those qualities, ones I practice daily as an artist and a teacher focused on interdisciplinary applications of the arts and sciences.
My name is Nancy Roberge. Mr. Art Cooley was my 10th grade biology teacher. My first memory was in the 10th grade science biology class when Mr. Cooley asked for a show of hands of those people that weren't particularly fond of snakes. Well, my hand shot up like a rocket. So, of course, as my luck would have it, Mr. Cooley chose me to come up to the front of the class, wherein he handed me a little garter snake. I believe it was a garter snake, a harmless snake. I was scared. I was unappreciative of this event. And it didn't make me like snakes any more than I had before. My other memory of Mr. Cooley was the deep abiding respect that he instilled in all of us for nature and for our environment. I have spent the rest of my life picking up trash, especially on beaches. I now reside in Massachusetts, and every time I'm walking on the beach, either here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, or on Cape Cod, I am always picking up trash. I have picked up trash on Ho-Hum Beach on Fire Island, across from where we were raised. My husband and I have picked up trash on the Caribbean beaches that we have walked. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, "Respect and take care of your mother," and it showed a picture of Mother Earth. And I thought to myself immediately, I bet you Mr. Cooley wrote that bumper sticker. Thank you for instilling all of us a great appreciation and respect for the environment and for nature. And we're saddened by your loss, but hopefully there are enough of us that still walk the beaches and walk this earth, and will pick up trash and respect and appreciate nature and the environment. Thank you, Mr. Cooley.
Mr. Cooley instilled in me a deep love of the environment and an awareness of the need to preserve it. Well, one thing that I remember the most is the Saturday morning bird watching expeditions. He would take a group of students in his VW van, and we would go to various wildlife places, and we would go through single file through paths in the woods, and we would have binoculars, and Mr. Cooley would point out all the birds and the species, and we learned so much. We brought our own bird books, and we would check back of the books to see what birds we had seen, and it was totally fabulous. And I remember once he carrying his tripod, running across a meadow because there was a gyrfalcon, and he was so excited. No one could be more excited than Mr. Cooley. He was so enthusiastic, and he got all of us to be extremely excited about ornithology. And this was even when we had to get up at 4 a.m, and we kept ourselves awake, drinking from thermoses of Constant Comet tea. And we'll miss him very, very much.
The Bellport High School class of 1970 dedicated its yearbook, The Log, to Art Cooley with these words: "In recognition of your ability to communicate with students and instill in them a scientific curiosity not unlike your own."
I'm Laura Quattrochi, class of 74. I live in Northern California, Mendocino County. Very few people, other than my parents, influenced my life like Art Cooley and Dennis Peelston. When I think of Art, I fondly remember Dennis, who together changed my life path. How fortunate I was to be taken under their wings and travel to beautiful and extraordinary places and share in their passionate interest, curiosity, and love of nature. They were teachers that opened my life to so many things, from plant taxonomy to ornithology. Art inspired and with boundless enthusiasm encouraged me to lead SEQ because of my zeal for organization. He saw in me things I didn't recognize in myself, and through his encouragement and support, I studied botany on scholarship at Drew University, worked at the USDA in a cancer plant research project, later helped develop a native wildflower division at the largest flower seed grower in the U.S., worked with Lady Bird Johnson providing wildflower seed for the National Wildflower Research Center, and in 1987 established my own company designing garden seed products for the U.S., Canada, and Japan. In 2019, I left the workforce to focus more on cooking, gardening, art, furniture design, but more importantly, to continue the battle to protect our environment as we did as students for environmental quality. Thank you, Art. I will miss you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Shreve, aka Boo.
And I'm Carista, aka Pamela Borg. We are authors of The Carmen's River Story, inspired by our beloved Art Cooley, which we wrote in 12th grade in 1974 to save this river.
Yeah, it was included under the New York State Wild and Scenic River System. We had canoe races. The whole class did these long species lists. A lot of people contributed illustrations, including Dennis Peelston.
Peelston.
Mr. Reynolds, the English teacher.
That's right.
Helped us, and so we kind of did this, and we were real Cooley kids. In fact, I'm still writing books like this. I'm basically doing the same thing I was then.
Yes, and this is before computers. We hand typed this, or typed it by hand, with whiteout. I remember all that whiteout, and we did these drawings by hand. See? And Art took us up and down the coast, taught us bird banding from Florida to, remember, Canada, and he was just a constant joy in our life.
Yeah, really opened our eyes to nature, and we're still hanging out there and still hanging out with each other too.
Yes, and I remember also the first Earth Day.
Yeah.
He inspired us to participate in Earth Day, the very first Earth Day, and he was a sweetheart.
Yeah, the kind of person that changes your life.
He does.
So we're grateful.
He was joyful. He was just always joyful and laughing and empowering.
And laughing at us too, which is really funny.
He would tease us, so we give thanks to Art Cooley.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
One of the great skills Art had was his work with students. Motivating them to learn, explore, and take action was a powerful force for the environment. So many of his students went on to be advocates and professionals in the field. I have always felt that SEQ was a vital institution for Bellport High School. From the oil dumping in Swan Lake to the bicycle trips to Albany carrying Carmen's River Pure, SEQ tales are legendary. I like the story about the two authors of the Carmen's River story, Elizabeth Shreve and Pamela Borg, writing the book that helped make the Carmen Rivers a wild, scenic, and recreational river under New York state law. Under the leadership of Art, these two high school students researched and wrote the book, which is still a good baseline of information about the river. When they had finished writing the book, there were no funds to publish it. Art suggested asking a local philanthropist for support, but he told them they had to dress up a bit to make the ask in order to make a good appearance. Not used to dressing up, they ultimately agreed, but they were successful, and Mrs. Elizabeth Poth Morrow gave them the funding to publish the book in 1974. She later commented that they were very fine young women. The Post-Morrow Foundation that she founded published a second edition in 1998. Empowering students was a wonderful gift that Art gave to the many young people he taught and motivated for the betterment of all of us.
Hi, my name is Julian Slaughter. I'm filming from the shores of Lake Michigan in Michigan. I have a few memories of Art. The first and foremost was that of a young child. I was a neighborhood friend of Jonathan, Art's son, and I stepped on a piece of glass at the beach. And Art carried me to my parents' home and subsequently had to go to the hospital and got several stitches. Fast forward to high school, I'm in Art's class, and the very first paper that he gave me back, he ripped it to shreds. He absolutely ripped it to shreds. From grammar to content, he made me be a good writer. And that was sort of a silver lining being in his biology class, was he was an excellent writer. But I found it ironic that I was in the Students of Environmental Quality. I was in class of 1978 at Bellport, and we are lobbying heavily to legislators to do the bottle, to actually pass the bottle bill. And I found it ironic, after all that work, the bottle pass actually passed. And the irony in all that is that had the bottle bill been passed when I was 6 years old, I might not have had to step on a piece of glass that was at the beach, because obviously bottles were worth more, would have been worth more, and it may have been turned in as opposed to broken on a beach.
Hi, this is Anthony Graves. I'm making this video, this tribute to Art, in Quito, Ecuador. We landed last night, and I was thinking about this family birding trip and how, at least in part, it's inspired by Art. I retired after a career in the environmental field. I retired from the town of Brookhaven as chief environmental analyst, and at least part of that is due to Art's influence, not the retirement, but the career in the environmental field. So I really miss him. And more than an inspiration or a guy who changed the world for the better environmentally, I miss him as a friend. He always had that great sense of humor, big loud laugh. And I was so happy I got to see him at Jonathan's house towards the end of his life, and we even got to go cross-country skiing up on Grand Mesa. So I'm really gonna miss Art, and I'm really glad that he was a big part of my life.
Hello, my name is Ian, and I am Art Cooley's grandchild. Jonathan Cooley is my dad. I am grateful for both of those statements, the obvious reason being that without them I would not exist, the less obvious reason being that without them I wouldn't be the complex, passionate person that I am. And yes, complex is an apt description, and certainly one I inherited, as I became acutely aware of during the final months I got to spend with my grandfather, whom my sister and I affectionately referred to as Grampus. For you cetacean fans out there, and I know there are many such people who knew my grandfather, you'll know that term. For those less acquainted with our marine mammal neighbors, Grampus is the genus name of Risso's dolphins, and it's also sometimes a name used for orcas. He chose that name for himself, and in my mind it only solidifies the obvious assumption made by anyone who met Art Cooley. The man would have much preferred to be a whale. Sadly, this was not his lot, so he made do by advocating for his would-be whale kin, birds, and any other member of the ecological niche he happened to find himself connected to. This is the side of him that most of you knew, and in many cases made a lasting impact on your lives in some form, regardless of whether he was your teacher, colleague, or friend. But as I stated earlier, complexity runs in the family, and Art certainly was quite the source of it. So quickly, a note on tributes that seems oft forgotten. We are all multidimensional, complex beings who have as many versions of ourselves as people we have ever met. Oftentimes, someone may only ever get to know a single version. Gifted are those of us who get to see more than one, though in doing so we may be forced to reckon with conflict between versions that may never be reconciled. It is here we find the truest aspects of a person. We can never separate our conflicting selves. Rather, we are both at once, even if we may not always show both to every person in our lives. Art Cooley, Grampus, was no exception, and perhaps maybe even a testament to such paradoxical existence. The version that many of you know and cherish is not a version I knew well, though I wish I had. And though the version I knew led to a challenging and at times painful relationship, I want to pay tribute to it all the same. That's what a tribute is, honoring the whole person as they were, conflicts and all. Through all the stories we tell to one another, sharing versions of the same person, we all will come away with a more complete image. So let us share fully and deeply, and perhaps most importantly, honestly, even though that may be challenging at times. In this way, may Art live on, not as any one of us knew him, but as we all together did, as a complete person, as we all are, whether we know it or not. I look forward to hearing all the stories that there are to share, and hope that it is our turn to be the tribute of recollections and stories we are represented as fully as Art will be. Thank you.